On May 13, 1925, a scrap metal dealer named André Poisson handed 1.2 million francs in cash to a man he had known for less than a week, in exchange for the Eiffel Tower. The contract was signed in a private suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most expensive hotels in Paris. The cash was counted, the banker's draft was verified, and the two men shook hands. The seller promised that the formal transfer of title would arrive within the week. By that evening, the seller was on a train to Vienna. Poisson was a provincial dealer from outside Paris. He had spent 20 years building a modest scrap metal business, and he had come to the capital with one ambition: to break into the Parisian market where the real money was. He was not stupid, he was hungry. And there is a difference between a fool and a man who wants something so badly that he stops asking the right questions. The letter that brought him to the Hôtel de Crillon had arrived on government stationery. Embossed seal of the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes. A meeting regarding a confidential infrastructure matter. Attendance requested. Discretion required. Poisson had checked the stationery. He had looked up the ministry. He had pressed his best suit. He had done everything a reasonable businessman would do when summoned by the French government. What he had not done was call the ministry to verify whether the man who signed the letter actually existed. That man's real name was Robert V. Miller. He was born on January 4th, 1890, in Hostin, a small town in the mountains of Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic. By the time he arrived in Paris in early 1925, he had been arrested in at least a dozen European cities. He spoke 5 languages without a detectable accent. He carried 45 known aliases in his pocket. The one he used in Paris was Count Victor Lustig. He was not a count. He had never been a count. But he moved through rooms the way a count would, and that turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Lustig had learned to read people before he learned to read contracts. Growing up in Hostin, the son of the town's mayor, he had access to the kind of educated, multilingual upbringing that Bohemia provided its better families. He attended school in Dresden, where he picked up German. He studied in Paris, where he picked up French and a knife scar on his left cheek from a jealous husband. By the time he was 20, he had been through enough European capitals to understand one fundamental truth about wealthy people. They do not verify credentials, they verify confidence. A man who hesitates is questioned. A man who belongs is welcomed. His first known arrests were for petty theft and card cheating in several European cities before the First World War. But Lustig was not interested in petty crime. He was interested in architecture. Specifically, the architecture of trust. How it was built, what it required, where it was weakest. He had spent the previous decade working transatlantic ocean liners between Europe and New York. The crossings took 5 to 7 days. That was enough time to identify a wealthy mark, build trust over meals and card games, and execute a con before the ship docked. His signature device was something he called the Romanian money box, a small mahogany machine he claimed could duplicate currency. He would feed a $100 bill into one end, wait 6 hours, and pull 2 identical bills from the other end. The machine worked because Lustig had preloaded it with real bills before the demonstration. He sold these boxes for $25,000 to $30,000 each. By the time the mark realized the machine no longer produced anything, Lustig was in a different country under a different name. The ocean liners were perfect for him. A floating hotel with no police, no phone lines, and a captive audience of millionaires with nothing to do for 5 days. He would board in Southampton or Le Havre as a European aristocrat, dine at the captain's table, lose gracefully at cards for the first 2 nights to establish himself as a wealthy amateur, and then propose a private game with higher stakes on the 3rd night. By the time the ship docked in New York, his marks had lost thousands, and Lustig had a new set of admirers who would vouch for Count Lustig at any dinner party in Manhattan. But by 1925, the ocean liner companies had started posting warnings about confidence men. Passenger lists were being screened. Some of Lustig's known aliases had been flagged. He needed new territory. He found it in a newspaper article. In March of that year, several Paris papers reported that the Eiffel Tower was in trouble. The structure had been built in 1889 for the World's Fair, designed by Gustave Eiffel as a temporary monument, meant to stand for 20 years and then be torn down. It had survived past its expiration date because it turned out to be useful as a radio transmission tower. But by 1925, it was 36 years old, visibly rusting and expensive to maintain. The articles discussed whether the cost of upkeep could still be justified. Some editorials suggested it could not. Lustig read these articles. Then he sat in his hotel room and did something that separated him from every other grifter running short cons on tourist boats. He designed a system. The first thing he did was research the scrap metal industry in Paris. He learned how government contracts worked, who the major dealers were, and how bidding was handled. He discovered that in the scrap metal business, the most valuable commodity was not metal. It was early information. Dealers who heard about a government demolition project before their competitors could place low bids and lock in contracts worth millions. The entire industry ran on whispered tips and private meetings with government officials. This was his opening. He was not going to invent something his marks had never seen. He was going to give them something they already believed in. He identified 5 of the most prominent scrap metal dealers in Paris. He had official stationery forged, matching the exact letterhead and seal of the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes. He booked a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, because that was where government officials conducted meetings they did not want held in government buildings. He hired a limousine with a uniformed driver. Then he wrote 5 letters. Each letter was formal, brief, and deliberately vague. It invited the recipient to a confidential meeting regarding a major government infrastructure project. It stressed that the matter was sensitive and that discretion was required. It was signed by the Deputy Director General of the Ministry. The total start-up cost of the operation was a few hundred francs: printing, a hotel suite, and a car. All 5 men came. The meeting takes place in a gilded conference room at the Crillon. Lustig walks in wearing a well-tailored dark suit. He carries a leather briefcase. His posture communicates exactly one thing. He is a man who belongs in this room more than anyone else in it. He tells the 5 dealers that the Eiffel Tower has become a financial burden the government can no longer sustain. A decision has been made at the highest levels to sell the structure for scrap metal. The sale will be conducted quietly, he explains, because the public reaction will be intense. He pauses and looks around the room. He does not need to say the word protests. The men understand. He distributes thick folders to each dealer. The folders contain structural specifications, cost breakdowns, and tonnage estimates. They are heavy enough to feel official, detailed enough that nobody reads them carefully. This is important. Lustig understood that the weight of a document matters more than its content. A man holding a heavy folder full of numbers feels like he is holding the truth. He then invites all 5 men on a tour of the tower itself. They ride in his limousine. At the tower, workers happen to be on site, repainting sections of the structure. Lustig tells the group casually that these workers are conducting preliminary demolition assessments. Nobody questions this. The workers are right there. They are clearly doing something. Lustig has not arranged their presence. He has simply used it. This is the difference between a con artist and a liar. A liar makes things up. A con artist makes things fit. After the tour, he asks each dealer to submit a sealed bid within 2 days. Now Lustig does the thing that turns a good con into an untouchable one. He has spent the entire day watching the 5 men. He has noted who asked aggressive questions, who seemed confident, who was trying to impress. And he has identified the one man who did none of these things. The one who sat quietly, who nodded too eagerly, who laughed a half-second late at every joke. André Poisson. Poisson is not the wealthiest of the 5. He is not the most connected. He is the most uncertain. He is a man from outside Paris, trying to prove he belongs among Parisian businessmen. And that insecurity radiates from him like heat. Lustig approaches Poisson privately after the group meeting. He suggests they have a drink. Over cognac, Lustig shifts his body language. He becomes slightly less official, slightly more human. He confides that the government salary is not what people assume. He has a family. There are expenses. If Monsieur Poisson's bid were to be selected, a small personal consideration, a facilitation fee, paid in cash and off the books, would help ensure the process moves smoothly. He is asking for a bribe. This is the mechanism that makes the entire con self-sealing. A legitimate government official would never ask for a bribe, but a corrupt government official is not someone you report. He is someone you pay, quickly and quietly. Because the moment you hand over that envelope, you are complicit. You have committed a crime alongside him. You will never go to the police, because going to the police means confessing your own role. Lustig has not just found his mark, he has recruited his own silencer. Poisson's bid arrives the next day. The purchase price for the tower comes to roughly 250,000 francs. The separate envelope, the personal consideration, contains approximately 950,000 francs more. The total is around 1.2 million francs, the equivalent of roughly $70,000 in 1925. On May 13th, Lustig meets Poisson to finalize the deal. Papers are signed. Cash and a banker's draft change hands. Lustig shakes Poisson's hand warmly, assures him that the formal transfer of title will arrive within the week, and returns to his hotel. That evening he checks out of the Hôtel de Crillon. He takes a train to Vienna. He does not rush. He does not disguise himself. He reads the newspaper in his first-class compartment and orders coffee. A week passes. Then 2. The transfer of title does not arrive at André Poisson's office. Poisson writes to the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes. The ministry responds that they have no Deputy Director General by the name of Victor Lustig, no record of any meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon, no record of any sale, no record of any plan to demolish or sell the Eiffel Tower. Poisson understands what has happened. He has paid 1.2 million francs for a structure he will never own, to a man who does not exist, through a ministry office that never authorized the transaction. He does not call the police. He cannot. Reporting the crime means explaining, publicly, that he attempted to buy the Eiffel Tower in a back-channel deal and paid a cash bribe to a government official. His business reputation would be destroyed. The newspapers would make him a national joke. The humiliation would be total and permanent. So André Poisson absorbs the loss. He tells no one. The con disappears into silence. And Victor Lustig, reading Parisian newspapers from his apartment in Vienna, sees no police reports, no investigations, no mention of any unusual activity involving the Eiffel Tower. So he does it again. Approximately 6 weeks after the first sale, Lustig returns to Paris. He identifies 5 new scrap metal dealers. He prints new stationery. He books another hotel suite. He writes 5 new letters. He runs the entire operation a second time, with almost no changes to the method. This time, the mark he selects is more cautious, or perhaps less afraid of embarrassment. Before the deal is finalized, the second target contacts the police. By the time detectives arrive at the hotel, the suite has been vacated. The stationery is gone. The limousine company confirms only that a man paid cash for 3 days of service and gave a name that matches no one in their records. Lustig is already across the border. But now there are police reports filed in Paris. Now there are physical descriptions circulating across French law enforcement. A man in his mid-30s, tall, well-dressed, scar on his left cheek, speaks perfect French. Now there is a name, even if it is a fake one, attached to a specific and deeply embarrassing crime that the Paris police would rather not publicize. The Eiffel Tower con is over. But Victor Lustig is not. He crosses the Atlantic and reinvents himself in the United States. He runs the Romanian money box on American industrialists and Texas oil men. He moves between New York, Chicago, Kansas City, and dozens of smaller cities, never staying anywhere long enough to become familiar. In the early 1930s, he does something that even other con artists considered insane. He approaches Al Capone. Lustig walks into Capone's headquarters in Chicago and pitches an investment opportunity. He is charming, specific, and confident. Capone, who is at that point the most powerful and most violent criminal in America, hands him $50,000 in cash. Lustig takes the money. He places it in a safe deposit box. He does absolutely nothing with it for 2 months. Then he returns to Capone. He tells him the deal fell through. He places all $50,000 on the table, every bill accounted for. Capone stares at the money. In his entire career, no one has ever returned money to him. People steal from Capone and disappear. People beg Capone for more time. No one walks into his office and hands back $50,000 with an apology. Capone is so impressed by this that he gives Lustig $5,000 as a consolation gift. Lustig walks out with $5,000 of Al Capone's money, having risked nothing, invested nothing, and produced nothing. The entire con was built on one psychological insight. If you return a dangerous man's money, he will trust you more than if you had doubled it. But by 1930, Lustig's confidence work is becoming harder to sustain. He is too well known in too many cities. His descriptions are circulating among police departments. He needs a steadier income. He finds a partner. Tom Shaw is a chemist from Nebraska with a talent for reproducing the feel and color of US currency paper. Together, they set up a counterfeiting operation that over the next several years floods the American economy with more than $2 million in fake bills. The quality is exceptional. The bills pass inspection at banks. Secret Service agents later described the counterfeits as among the best they have ever encountered. Lustig and Shaw produce the bills in a series of rented apartments and small workshops, moving locations every few weeks. Lustig handles distribution through a network of middlemen in New York, while Shaw manages production. For nearly 5 years, the operation runs without interruption. The Secret Service knows the bills exist. They have samples. They have chemical analyses. What they do not have is a name. The crack comes from a place Lustig never thought to protect. Her name was Billy May, though she went by several others. She was Lustig's mistress, one of at least two women he was seeing simultaneously in New York. Their relationship was volatile, fueled by money and mutual deception. Billy May knew about the counterfeiting. She knew about the printing locations. She knew about Tom Shaw. What she did not know, until the spring of 1935, was that Lustig was also seeing another woman. When she found out, she did not confront him. She did not make threats. She walked into the nearest police station and told them everything. She gave them his real name, his aliases, his address, the location of his printing equipment, the name of his partner, the distribution network, everything. On May 10, 1935, FBI agents acting on Billy May's information opened a storage locker at the Times Square subway station in Manhattan. Inside, they found $51,000 in counterfeit bills and a complete set of printing plates. The case against Lustig was built in a single afternoon. Lustig was arrested in New York. The charges were federal, counterfeiting and distribution of fraudulent currency. The evidence was overwhelming. Conviction was certain. But Victor Lustig was not finished performing. On the night of September 1st, 1935, while awaiting trial in the Federal House of Detention in Lower Manhattan, a facility known informally as the Tombs, Lustig made his exit. He had somehow acquired or fashioned a cutting tool. He used it to saw through the bars on his cell window. Then he knotted together bedsheets, multiple sets collected over several days from his cell and possibly from neighbouring inmates, and lowered himself down the exterior wall of the building. He was 4 stories above the street. It was raining, the sheets were slippery, guards patrolled the perimeter below, and Victor Lustig, at 45 years old, climbed down the side of a federal detention center in the middle of Manhattan and walked away. He was free for 27 days. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in the city's history. Agents fanned out across the eastern seaboard. They checked every known alias, every former address, every contact. Lustig had no network left to shelter him. Billy May's testimony had burned every safe house, every middleman, every friend. He moved through cheap hotels under names no one had on file, paying cash, avoiding trains and buses where his photograph had been posted. He made it as far as Pittsburgh before a sharp-eyed agent recognized him on the street. Lustig did not run. He did not resist. He straightened his coat and allowed himself to be handcuffed. Even at the end, he maintained the posture. This time, there was no bail. There was no negotiation. There was a trial, a conviction on every count, and a sentence of 20 years in federal prison. He was sent to Alcatraz, prisoner number 523. Alcatraz, in the mid-1930s, held the men the federal government considered most dangerous or most likely to escape. Lustig was both. He joined a population that included Al Capone, the same man he had conned out of $5,000 in Chicago. There is no record of any interaction between them on the island. Capone, by that point, was suffering from the late stages of syphilis and was largely incoherent. Whether he remembered the charming European who had returned his $50,000 is unknown. Lustig spent over a decade on the island. The man who had dined at the captain's table on ocean liners, who had checked into the Hotel de Crillon as a government official, who had shaken hands with Al Capone and walked away richer, now ate meals in a concrete dining hall and slept in a cell smaller than the bathroom of his former suites. His health deteriorated steadily. The damp, cold conditions of the island prison accelerated whatever was already breaking down inside him. In early 1947, he was transferred to the Federal Medical Facility in Springfield, Missouri, suffering from complications that the prison system on Alcatraz could no longer manage. He died there on March 11, 1947. He was 57 years old. The cause of death was pneumonia. His death certificate, filed by a clerk who had never met him and knew nothing of his history, lists 2 occupations for the deceased: apprentice salesman and counterfeiter. Not count, not deputy director general, not any of the 45 names he had carried across 2 continents and 30 years of deception. Before his arrest, Lustig had written a document that circulated among criminals and was later published by journalists who covered his trial. He called it the 10 Commandments for Conmen. The first commandment was, be a patient listener. The 8th was never boast, and let your importance be quietly obvious. The 10th was never get drunk. He followed all 10. It was not the commandments that failed him. It was the one variable he never wrote a rule for. He trusted someone. André Poisson never spoke publicly about what happened at the Hôtel de Crillon in May 1925. His name does not appear in any newspaper from the period in connection with the sale. He kept his silence for the rest of his life. How much he actually paid for the Eiffel Tower and how long it took him to accept what had happened, he never said. The tower is still standing. It costs the French government approximately 50 million euros per year to maintain. Roughly 7 million people visit it annually. Not one of them knows that it was once sold to a scrap metal dealer from outside Paris, by a man from a small town in Bohemia who spoke 5 languages and carried 45 names, and understood better than almost anyone who has ever lived that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a lie. It is a lie that